For those of you that understand Igbo well, I'm going to say this in English as well. N'okwu abụ Igbo na-asụ n'olu n'olu abụghị naanị okwu, ọ bụ ilu, bụrụkwa okwu. Ndị Igbo kwenyere na Igbo na-asụ n'olu n'olu, mana ha kwa ụkwara, ọ bụrụ otu. Nke a bụ okwu ma ọ bụ ilu na-akọwa ka Igbo si nwegasa olundi, ihe a na-akpọ olundi nke ndị bekee kpọrọ dialect. N'ihi na okwu a bụ olundi nọ n'asụsụ Igbo bụ ihe otu n'ime ihe ga-eme ka ịghọta na Igbo hụrụ onwe ha dịka ndị nwere olu dị iche iche. Mgbe anyị na-ekwu okwu olundi, ụfọdụ ndị mmadụ na-ele ya anya n'ọnọdụ ihe kewara anyị, mana agaje m ileba ya anya n'ọnọdụ ihe jikọtara anyị dịka ndị Igbo. Today's topic is what I tagged aspects of Igbo dialect. It's a topic that is current, it's a topic that is out there, it's a topic that people want to talk about, it's a topic that people passionately talk about, even sometimes emotionally. Igbo people has a saying, Igbo na-asụ n'olu n'olu mana akwa ụkwara ọ bụrụ otu, which could be translated as Igbo people speak in different dialects, but when they cough, it sounds the same. This is to say that Igbo people believe that though they have different dialects, that the dialects do not does not mean their disunity, but rather it means what brings them together. It means their unity, even though it could be coming out of their voices in different ways. Ị bụrụ onye Igbo, ị bụrụ nwa afọ Igbo na-asụ Igbo, ị na-asụ otu olu ma ọ bụ abụọ. If you are a native Igbo speaker, you speak one dialect or the other. You speak either in your dialect or you speak in another person's dialect by virtue of you having a contact with that dialect, or you speak in the standard dialect. Achọrọ m ime ka ị mara na ọ bụghị naanị Igbo nwere olundi. It is not only Igbo language that has dialects. Even this foreign language that I'm speaking now has dialects and the standard. So dialect in a language is not a mark of disunity, or should not be. Ọtụtụ asụsụ mba ụwa nwere olundi. Ada ndewo adị m mma o, daalụ. Dịka o si gbasata Igbo, the issue of dialect has also taken a very long, efforts and years to bring to where we are today. Adandeo, thank you. Ihe gbasara ịhazi Igbo, ịchịkwa Igbo ọnụ, ọ bụ ihe werele ọtụtụ afọ n'oge. I want to take us back to what I taught about three weeks ago when I was looking at the mkpụrụ edemede Igbo. Okay. What I taught last 3 weeks, I can remember when I was dealing with the Igbo letters and orthography. Lady Gray, you are welcome. Dalo. I try to trace the history of the Igbo orthography. And I want to remind you that I said prior to the advent of the Europeans that colonized us, our language, Igbo, had a way of writing it down. And that writing system is called Nsibidi. But Nsibidi was being shared not just by the Igbo alone, but with Ibibio and possibly Efik and a couple of other languages that were not primarily Igbo. But it is not surprised that Nsibidi was being shared by Igbo and Ibibio and Efik. It's because it's one of the things that points to the fact that these languages came from a single language tree. Over the time, there became some separations. But I also noted that Nsibidi was not very popular. It was not popularly used among speakers because writing could have been said that was not very, popular then. That didn't mean that there was no writing system. Of course, people knew how to mark things and represent things on the floor or anywhere. Hieroglyphic, pictogram. These are all writing systems that developed into today's system for many languages. So Igbo is not, different in that regard. All right. Now, I want to touch on that history again to say that before the advent of bringing Igbo to this unification, Igbo as a language had suffered a lot of trouble, weathering some, troublesome times during colonial time. You remember the unification of Nigeria as a country. So it brought challenge to Igbo people, having foreigners trying to write down their language according to what they heard. It was a problem to the language. But it was also at that time that Igbo scholars started, seeing that there's need to do works to, unify their language. Okay. Ọtụtụ ihe agabigala n'ebe asụsụ Igbo nọ. Mana ihe ndị Igbo ji enwe aṅụrị n'ụbọchị taa nye onwe ha, kọrọ onwe ha aka, bụ na n'agbanyeghị ihe niile, asụsụ Igbo bụ nke enwere ụzọ esi ede ya, nwee ụzọ ndị esi asụ ya. Kena, you're welcome. Ruo n'ụbọchị taa, Igbo nwere ike ikwu okwu ghọta onwe ha. Mgbe anyị na-ekwu okwu ihe gbasara olundi na nke a kpọrọ Igbo izugbe, izugbe is what is translated as Standard Igbo. Or SI, as abbreviated. And I'm going to be using this word a lot, whether mobuna Bekee mobuna Igbo, Izugbe or Standard Igbo. I'm going to be using it a lot. But I'm also going to be interchanging with this other word, Central Igbo. Now, I want to say that you may have also been hearing me say this, Standard or Central, because most of the times you see people either misconstrue Standard for Central or use both interchangeably. Yes, using both interchangeably is permissible. You want to keep your Standard more Central. But I want to emphasize that We refer to standard mostly when we are looking at the written form of Igbo. Thank you, Kenna. We refer to standard most of the times when we're looking at the written form of Igbo. I cannot talk about the written form of Igbo and use central. Okay? But we also refer to central when we are talking about the spoken form of Igbo, colloquial, the spoken form of Igbo. I can refer to central. I can use the word central to refer to the spoken word, as well as use the word standard to refer to the spoken, as well as the written. But I cannot use central to refer to the written form. I can't say I am writing in Central Igbo. In that way now, it is becoming incorrect. But I can say I wrote in Standard Igbo. I can also say I'm speaking Standard Igbo, as well as say I am speaking Central Igbo. But I can't say I'm writing Central Igbo. I hope that's clear. Ama m na onye ọbụla ghọtara ya n'ihi na asụrụ m ya na bekee. Ama m na bekee ka anyị na-aghọta karịa. Okay. Okwu a bụ standard na central. Igbo na-akpọ ya Igbo izugbe. Izugbe na-akọwa maka nke mgbe ị dere na Igbo nke a na-atụ anya na ọtụtụ ndị Igbo maọbụ ndị Igbo niile ga-aghọta. Ọ bụrụ na m kwuo okwu, nwa afọ Igbo nọ na Ngwa aghọta m, nwa afọ Igbo nọ na Nkanụ aghọta m, nwa afọ Igbo nọ na Enuani aghọta m, nwa afọ Igbo nọ Ibuza, na nwa afọ Igbo nọ na Eka, na nwa afọ Igbo nọ na as far as ndị nke nọ na Edo steeti, ha niile wee ghọta m ihe m na-ekwu. Gị mara na ihe m sọrọ bụ Standard Igbo. Asụrụ m Standard Igbo. You can as well say na m sọrọ Central Igbo. All right. For more technical approach, we use standard more than we use central. One of the reasons for that is that there's a part of Igbo that is mapped out to be Central Igbo. I think Central and Southern Igbo. That is a categorization. So that is why we choose to say standard more than central. All right. Igbo na-ele ihe gbasara. Yes, standard is for writing, central could be for speech. Igbo na-ele ihe gbasara olu ndị ha anya. Ndị Igbo ghọtara na-ele ihe gbasara olu ndị anya dịka enwere ike ịkọwa ya dịka ọjị. Ile anya ihe jikọtara ọjị. Ọjị na-agba aka abụọ, atọ, anọ, ise, as the case may be. Ịgbawa ọjị, iwe hụ na ọ nọkọtara ọnụ. Mana imeghe mkpụrụ ọjị, iwe hụ na enweghị ihe jikọrọ, enweghị akwara, enweghị ọkpụkpụ, enweghị ntu akọrọ ga-esi na nke a fee na nke a, mana ha aka ọjị ndị ahụ niile nọkọtara ọnụ ruo na tupu gị gbawa ya ọ ga-enye nsogbu. Is some kind of adhesive that holds it together but is invisible. That is an analogy that can be used to talk about how Igbo nations are being held together, different dialects, but the same language. That, I believe, can help somebody to understand more. Unless you do not know, you've not seen Oji seed before. There's different is it hands or different sides of the Oji, particles of it that are joined together in the middle, but there's nothing that holds them together, but it's tightly fixed. Okay. All right. N'ime ihe m na-akụzi n'isiokwu a, otu n'ime ihe a na-atụ anya bụ onye ọbụla bịara klaasị a bịa zuo ya ga-aghọta ndịiche dị na olundi dị iche iche, ghọta ihe dị iche n'etiti olundi na izugbe, wee ghọta mgbe mkpa ọ dị na nwa afọ Igbo ga-ama ka esi ekwu okwu ma ọ bụ ede ihe n'izugbe. After this class, a person who attends the class completely would understand the differences between dialects and the standard, the differences between one dialect and the other, and the reason, the significance, and the importance of an Igbo speaker knowing the standard in addition to their dialect. Okay. Tupu m abịa na klaasị a, mụ na ndị ọrụ m nwere mkparịta ụka. M jụrụ ụfọdụ n'ime ha kedu ihe unu chere, kedu ihe unu na-atụ anya na klaasị nke ụbọchị taa. Ha wee nye m ihe dị ha n'obi. O nyere m nkwado, mekwa m ka m ghọta ụfọdụ ihe unu ga-eche dịka anyị na-ele anya n'isiokwu a. All right. Ada, you say you think you speak the dialect in your family. Of course, I expect that families should speak dialects, their dialect. Okay. All right. I'm going to read a few things from existing research when I get to the point of saying how many dialects of Igbo do we have. That is a question that how many Igbo dialects? How many do we have? That is a question that has gotten different answers at different times by different people. Obone Ghana data online. I nwere ike iwete 3 different researches might be telling you how many dialects. Some people would say it this way, that Igbo has over 20 dialects. Others will say Igbo has over 30 dialects. I've also seen a record that says Igbo has up to 100 dialects. Now, there has not been a unified agreement on how many dialects of Igbo, which of course, it is not abnormal. It is not out of place. The reason is because the research in Igbo language keeps developing. Okay? Igbo Enugu Ndewo is a funny coincidence that while I'm talking about the different dialects, somebody joined on TikTok whose name is Igbo Enugu. Dalo one name okay. All right. And that is to say that they want a dialect in Ghana or Igbo Enugu dialect. All right. Yeah, some people think 100. Now, ihe ọzọ nwere ike ibute enwebeghị nkwekọrịta na olundi ole nwere n'Igbo bụ na enwere ndị ga-aga nchọcha wee hụ ụfọdụ olundi wee chịkọta ha ọnụ dịka na enwere m ike isi dịka na ịbịa n'Imo steeti esi n'Owerri na Mbaise na Obowo na-asụ otu ihe ahụ. Enwere ịga aga nchọcha wee chịkọta olundi Owerri na olundi ka m were ya olundi Owerri na olundi Ngọkpala si na ha na-asụ otu ihe, wee chịkọta olu Mbaise na olu Obowo si na ha na-asụ otu ihe, ma ọ bụ Ngwa si na ha na-asụ otu ihe. Onye ọzọ nwere ike gaa nchọcha ahụ, otu nchọcha ahụ, wee sị mba na enwere Mbaise dialect, Obowo dialect, Ngọkpala dialect, Owerri dialect. Ndị abụọ, mmadụ abụọ ndị agara nchọcha, ihe ha kwuru ma ọ bụ ihe ha dere nwere ike ịbụ eziokwu n'otu aka ahụ. Ihe nwere ike ibute ndịiche na ihe ha kwuru na ihe ha kwenyere ga-abụzi ka ha si leba anya na ihe gbasara ka ndị a si asụ. And why I brought this instance is because you might go to a place, you find out that these two communities that are side by side neighbors, they have a greater percentage of vocabulary that they use together. They also have a high percentage of how they say things that are similar. But if you go down, you find out there are differences in how they say some things. Wherever you are now that you are an Igbo speaker, you can bear witness this happens with the dialect that you speak. True or false? So if a person comes and focuses on what similarities these two communities have in the way they speak, they might find that these two communities as one dialect. While another person goes to that research and wants to dig deeper into what are the differences in these two dialects, the person might find numerous enough to claim that these two communities are different dialects. Now, both academic reports can be true at the same time. And that might be the reason that we might not have a definite number of Igbo dialects. The other thing is that the speakers of one dialect are the ones who know that what they speak is different, sounds different from what the other people speak. Wanda Saleh, mentioned in our conversation that I think she referred to that how many dialects? There are about 15 different dialects of Ebonyi. 15 different dialects spoken in Ebonyi. Okay? Now, I want us to begin to be careful to listen to how I use some of 13, more than there, how I will be using some identifications. I'm careful to separate our cultural identity from political identity. When I use something like Anambra, I might be using a political identity. Something like Imo, I might be also using a political identity as well as a cultural identity. Because one, before Imo State was created, people around Imo had a tag that was Imo. Before Anambra State was created, people around Anambra had a tag called Omambala, which the Europeans converted to Anambra. These states were created out of that. This is different from before Abia was created. There was nothing like Abia as a people. Abia was created as a name and people were carved out. It's different from before Delta was created. The zone Delta, they had a name, either Anioma or Enoani. But Delta is given to include people who are in this area and people who are not primarily Igbo. So, cultural identity, I would say linguistic identity, and then political identity. All right. N'ịga n'ihu ka anyị hụ ihe ụfọdụ ndị mmadụ dere na ihe gbasara ole ka dialect Igbo dị. But in my class, I'm going to focus on what is referred to as the major dialects in relation to the standard Igbo. Agajem ileba anya, agajem iguzoro na oghere nke eke wepụtara kpọọ ya major dialect n'olu ndị kacha ndị a na-anụkarị maọbụ ndị a họpụtara ndị tinyere aka wee mebe olu a na-akpọ Igbo Izugbe. Those we might focus our concentration on. That does not mean that any dialect is going to be left out. No, we are going to see expressions from different dialects. And while I do that, I'm going to also emphasize that my class is going to be looking at two aspects of the dialect, the vocabulary and the writing structure. The writing structure. Ihe ndị mere ka olu ndị Igbo dị iche nwere ike ịgụnye mkpụrụ okwu na ihe a na-akpọ ya na ka esi ede. Achọrọ m ime ka anyị mara na ọtụtụ olu ndị anyị abụghị ihe anyị na-ede, abụghịkwanụ ihe anyị maara ka esi ede. Ọtụtụ mkpụrụ okwu anyị na-akpọ n'olu ndị anyị ahụbeghị ebe edere ya mbụ. Our dialects, some of our dialects, if not all of our dialects, have words that we have not seen written before, have expressions we don't even know how to write them. If you are a speaker of a dialect and you are asked to say this in your dialect, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to know how to write it. Igbo speakers, is it true or false? Ndewo, Oriakụ Josephine Enemo. Ndewo, oh, right. Ndị na-asụ Igbo, ọ wụ eziokwu? Enwere ihe ndị ị nọrọ ị na-ekwu sitere n'olu ndị gị? Okay, Kenas na ọ bụ eziokwu. Enwere onye ọzọ? Ị maara ka esi asụ, ị maara ka esi ede, ya sị gị kedu otu unu si ekwu ihe dị otu a na olu ndị unu, gị kwuo ya. Mana ọ bụ ihe ajụọ gị sị kedu ka esi ede ya, o nwere ike gaa uche gị agbatabeghị ka esi ede ya. Otu a ka ọ dị na mkpụrụ ụda na-anọ na mkpụrụ okwu. E nwere ọtụtụ mkpụrụ ụda anọ na mkpụrụ okwu anyị na-ekwu n'olu ndị anyị. A sị gị kpọpụta okwu dị otu, ị ga-akpọpụta nwunye, mana asịzie gị dee ya, ị jụọ gị ka esi ede ya. Naanị otu onye ka m nụrụ sị na ọ bụ eziokwu. Ụmụ akwụkwọ, ọ bụ eziokwu ndị na-asụ Igbo? Ndị TikTok na-aha agbalị o. Naanị mkpụrụ mmadụ ole bụ ndị na-etinyere anyị aka n'akara ịhụnanya na klaasị a? Just a few people are tapping on the screen for us. It is not good. Ndị TikTok, Jen Favor, kedu? Unu ga na-abịa klaasị a, unu na-amụta ihe bara uru. Unu agaghị ekesa klaasị a, unu agaghị etinyere aka n'akara ịhụnanya. Ọ dị mma? Our focus, in addition to teaching this class, is to ensure that many more Igbo sons and daughters find this class. People need to find this class. Kena ejimaka na ịhụrụ ka m si dee ya Igbo na-asụ n'olu n'olu, both on the flyer and on the board. I expect that at least you should be able to write that one correctly from the way I wrote it. Okay? Right. So, Bikono, be active in the class. Create conversations, ask questions, answer questions, and then the list of it all, tap on the screen for us. Okay. All right. Kaigana ụfọdụ nchọcha ndị mmadụ depụtagoro. The Igbo language features over 30 distinct dialects spoken across southeastern Nigeria. While they share root vocabulary, mkpụrụ okwu, these variations sometimes differ enough to limit mutual intelligibility. Mkpụrụ okwu a bụ mutual intelligibility. Okpokpo bekee. Bekee gbara ọkpụrụkpụ. Ihe a bụ otu n'ime bekee ndị ọcha ji aghọgbu anyị. Ọ wụ ụdị bekee ha na-eji aghọgbu anyị. Mutual intelligibility. Ihe ọ pụtara bụ na nsụọ Igbo. Onye nọ na Delta anụ ya ghọta ya. Onye nọ na Enugu anụ ya ghọta ya. Onye nọ na Imo steeti anụ ya ghọta ya. Ụmụahịa, Owerri. Ya bụ mutual intelligibility. Speaking in a manner that people who share the same, who share different dialects of the same language will understand you. And I want to let you know, you train yourself to be able to communicate, to create mutual intelligibility. Ikenna nwanne m nwoke, ndewo o, daalụ. Thank you. A unified written form called Igbo Izugbe, Standard Igbo, is used for formal communication, education, and media. A unified form is used for formal communication, education, and media. So, ọ bụrụ na ị bụ nwa afọ Igbo, itoro mụta ka esi asụ olu ndị gị. Kamgbe ị bụ nwa afọ Igbo, ị na-asụ olu ndị gị. Mana ị gee Igbo dịka na redio maọbụ TV ebe eji Igbo ekwu okwu, ị na-anụ ihe dị iche site n'ihe ị na-asụ. Achọrọ m ime ka ị mara na ihe ahụ ị na-anụ na media, na TV, na redio, nke dị iche n'ihe ị na-asụ bụ ihe a na-akpọ Igbo Izugbe. Ị na-anụ ya na-aghọta ọtụtụ n'ime ihe nọ n'ime ihe a na-ekwu. Mana onye ahụ na-ekwu okwu, ihe ọ na-ekwu dị iche na ka isi asụ. That is the reason why so many people have turned into this class. The first thing they ask me is, which Igbo are you teaching? Some will say, is that Owerri Igbo? All right. So that is the reason. Some people will come here. The first thing they will hear sounds different from what they have been speaking and knowing. Where is this guy coming from? My brother, my sister, according to people, yes, it is still Igbo. But what you hear from my class mostly is something you will regard as a standard Igbo, because I am teaching people who speak different dialects. I cannot represent my dialect in what I speak, even though my dialect can interfere in the way I speak my standard, which is proper. Because there are some things I may have only heard how to say it in my dialect, and when I'm speaking the standard, it comes in without me thinking, oh, is it really how it's being spoken? But that's not in the case of atomato and atomato that we looked at the last time. So the atomato is a standard version, different from atomato, which is also a standard Igbo. All right. Now, this particular research finds some of these dialects to be amongst the major groups, and I'm going to explain why these are called the major groups, or they're among the major groups. Some of them are even creating AI videos within Igbo, calling it Igbo language. Yeah, it is another level and another thing we might, be talking about. That falls under what you could call adulteration of Igbo language. Nke mbụ bụ Northern and Western Igbo. Example, Onitsha, Enuani, Awka, Ika. This dialect is spoken heavily in Anambra and parts of Delta states. These dialects often feature fewer loan words and were heavily influential in early written Igbo literature. I want you to mark this. They were heavily influential. It was heavily influential in early written Igbo literature. That is the dialect called Northern or Western. And that's the dialect spoken around Onitsha, Enuani, Awka, and Ika. Central and Southern. Southern. This is a dialect spoken primarily in Imo State and Abia State. The Owerri and Umuahia dialects form the structural foundation for Igbo Izugbe. Owerri, Umuahia, Ohoho, Mbise. These dialects are said to form the structural foundation for Igbo Izugbe. I want you to also mark this last sentence as opposed to what you marked, that these dialects were influential in the early written Igbo literature. Mark these two. Eastern and Southeastern. Example, Ngwa, Afikpo, Ohafia, found in Abia and Ebonyi states. These variations feature distinct vowel shifts and unique vocabulary. Riverine / Southern. Example, Ikwere, Eche, Epeye, found in rivers and parts of Delta states. Speakers of this dialect often consider them standalone languages rather than mere dialects of Igbo. Mere dialects of Igbo. Yes, Roman / Anglican liturgical literature popularized the Anambra variation. Chizi Nwa Maakwụkwọ Ndewo for saying that, and I'm going to also emphasize on that. Chizi has just reminded us why the number one, what we marked there is these dialects were heavily influential in early written Igbo literature. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to say this. Igbo language dialects, this is from another research, okay? This says there are over 20 dialects spoken in Igbo land. The first one I read from a different research said there are over 30. Okay? Nke a bụzi over 20. As a result, there are various ways to spell and pronounce the same word in different dialects. This is about vocabulary now, right? In addition, there are even different grammar rules and letters in the Igbo dialect. Some Igbo dialects include Owerri, Umuahia, Onitsha, pronounced as Onitsha, Ngwa, Enugu, Anambra, and Ebonyi. Some. And what I'm reading is from ezinolo.com. You can check it out, please. You don't have to learn all the Igbo dialects if you don't want to. I recommend at least trying to become fluent in Central Igbo and learning the dialect of your village. I commend ezinolo.com for this statement because that is a statement upon which the work of Omenka app is built. We have a policy of Speak your dialect, but know the standard. Know how to communicate and write in the standard, but speak your dialect. Ị bụrụ onye na-asụ Igbo, sụọ olundi gị, mụta olundi gị ka ị na-eto. Ọ ihe ị kwesịrị ịmụta ka ị na-eto. Mana mụta ka esi asụ n'izugbe na ka esi ede izugbe. Ya nwa mere anyị ji nọrọ ebe a izu niile. Ọ bụrụ na ị che na ihe a na-akụzi ebe a bụ ihe bara uru, otu n'ime ihe m ga-achọ ka ị nweta dịka uru nkụzi a na-abara gị bụ ịmụta ka esi ede maọbụ ka esi asụ izugbe. Ịmụta izugbe bụ uru dịrị gị nwa na ụmụ gị na ụmụ ụmụ gị na ndị ezinụlọ gị. Ọ bụ uru dịrị gị. N'ihi na ọ bụrụ na ị na-anụ ka nwa afọ Igbo si n'ebe ọzọ na-ekwu okwu, ị kwesịrị ịghọta. Ị ga-akpa agwa ka ndị ọcha sị na ha na-asụ Bekee. Ịsụọ Bekee na-adaghị ka ha nwa si asụ, ha agaghị huh? What is that? Huh? Bekee ha kwa ka ị na-asụ. Because they didn't train themselves to be open, to be liberal enough to hear and understand other versions of English. Nke a ndị Nigeria na-eme ọnụ, oh, Nigerian English, Nigerian English. Nigerian English kwara na Nigeria. By the time you cross your feet from that country to a Western country, you find out that your Nigerian English sounds like gibberish. Because the owners of English will continue to ask you, huh? What is that? Huh? Now, for Ndocha, it is a minus. Because while they learn the version of English that they learn, they never trained themselves to be liberal enough to understand another version of English. Since they were busy colonizing other people, imposing English on them, they did not know that those other people were going to produce a different version of English that they speak, that they will have to listen to and understand. They thought that, oh, you're going to come back. That's why till tomorrow, you and I are being tested by, what do they call, IELTS and TOEFL. Doesn't matter how old you have been, how long you've been speaking English. When it comes to that, they'll have to put you to test. Even at that, even if you passed TOEFL 100 times over, you are still doing it for TOEFL's sake. You're still going to come back and speak Nigerian. All right, everybody give a shout out to Mr. Kingsley Ibe, whose wife put to bed a bouncing baby girl just yesterday, and they have been discharged from the hospital. Yoketia, my runaway student, where have you been? Shout out to Mr. Kingsley. Mazi Kingsley, I na anabatage na class we na ekele chukwu maka ọmụmụ nwa nke nwunye gị mụrụ, nke gị na nwunye gị mụrụ, n'ihi na ọ gị na ya gbakọtara ka mmụọ the thing. Yoketia, you've not been around. You can be in class and I do not notice you. Around is around but not in the class. So please be in the class. Congratulations, Mr. Kingsley. All right. While we do that, while we congratulate Mr. Kingsley, I was just saying, ịbụrụ nwa afọ Igbo, uru ịsụ maọbụ ịghọta olundi Igbo izugbe bara gị bụ na ọ ga-enyere gị aka ịghọtakwu Igbo n'ebe ọ gbasara basa karịa ihe ị na-asụ na ihe itoro mara ka esi asụ. What you have grown up learning, what you have seen your family speak, may be different from what somebody else from another region of Igbo might speak, but all the same Igbo. So that is the reason the advice from ezinolo.com to say you don't have to speak the standard if you don't want to, but you are encouraged to look at it as something that you should learn how to do. The Standard Igbo dialect, which is sometimes called Central Igbo, is also referred to as Izugbe. Many people in Igbo land are familiar with Standard Igbo despite the Igbo dialects that is spoken in their village. Okay? All right. Beautiful, Ada. Ndewo. Oh, thank you for getting your family to tune in. Ndewo. All right. A lot of Standard Igbo is formed from the, listen to this again. This is a different research from the first I wrote and I read. A lot of Standard Igbo is formed from the Owerri and Umuahia dialects. Some also consider the Onitsha dialect to be similar to the Anambra dialect. Either way, you should just keep in mind that you will come across different dialects as you interact with Igbo people. Unu na-ahụ ya? Ndị na-asụ Igbo nọ na-ahụ ya? Ọkwa unu na-ekwu okwu gị na onye ọzọ bụ nwa afọ Igbo si n'obodo ọzọ na-ekwu okwu, ị ga-anụ na ihe ọ na-ekwu dị iche. Otu o si ekwu okwu dị iche na otu gị nwa si ekwu. Mana ihe dị mkpa bụ na ị na-aghọta ya. Yoketia said, what about Enugu? Is it the general Igbo? Enugu is not general Igbo. It's Enugu dialect. Okay? So, ị na-ekwu okwu, ị bụrụ onye si Onitsha, na-ekwu gị na onye si Obosi, na-agbanyeghị na unu na-asụ ihe anyị nwa si Imo nwere ka ịkpọ Anambra dialect. Gị nwa unu abụọ gara ahụ onwe unu na-anụ ụfọdụ okwu iri okwu ndị dị iche dịka unu si ekwu ya. Enwe mgbe m na-akpọta otu Reverend Father bịa kọwara anyị maka ọjị ebe a. Kedu ebe o si? Aga m echeta ebe Father si. Mgbe ọ na-ekwu okwu, ọ na-ekwu ihe m nwere ike ịsị na ọ na-asụ Anambra dialect. Ọka ka o si. Mana mgbe ọ na-ekwu okwu, ọ sị na agba alụ ya na ya na-asụ Ọka, na ya amaghị ka esi asụ other dialects of Igbo. Na ya na-asụ Ọka n'ihi na ebe ahụ ka o si. Mana mụnwa na-abụghị onye Anambra, enweghị m ike ịghọta ma ọ na-asụ Ọka, ma ọ na-asụ Onitsha, ma ọ na-asụ kedu aha ya, maybe Obosi. Next, Idalo. I can understand, but I can't speak Igbo. I don't get why I can't. While I did, let's see. Igbo Enugu akwukwala n'okwu ebe a. Next, I'm sorry, you don't understand why. I will encourage you to join our Telegram group and then go and download the Menka app and possibly attend the class regularly. You would understand not just why you can't speak, but you will learn to speak. Okay? When I'm speaking Igbo, it sounds different from the native speakers. Well, Yoketia, your own case is a different level altogether. If you're not a native speaker, yes, your Igbo will sound very different from what the native speakers speak, unless you have enculturated yourself and stayed physically with the native speakers long enough to acquire that version of or that level of fluency. So yours is a case of fluency, and it is not to be blamed on you in any way. All right. Either way, you should just keep in mind that you will come across different dialects as you interact with Igbo people. I am going to try to focus on Central Igbo for this site, but I may use other dialects from time to time. I will try to label them when I can. Exactly the same position I explained, right? All right. And then went ahead to put some examples of Igbo. Now, having laid this foundation, the rest of my class is going to become a little bit more practical, but I'm going to say a few things anecdotally. And anecdotally is not because they are not backed up with facts. They are facts, but even though they are not written, on research, that's why I tagged anecdotal. but they are factual. Right. Agaje m ibido n'ikwu okwu ihe gbasara Imo dialect and Anambra dialect. And I want to say this because in the dialect of Igbo, dialects as opposed to the standard, there seems to be a contention, a confirmed contention, or the kind of code word that exists between Ghanaians and Nigerians everywhere in the world over jollof rice. Nah, wow. Anywhere a Ghanaian and a Nigerian meet and jollof rice is in their midst, wahala don't start. Wahala don't start with that. How many of you have been in contention with a Ghanaian about who cooks the better jollof rice? Then there's this group of people that have created their own dialect. People like me that have combined Imo dialect and Oka dialect to form my own peculiar dialect. What are they now? So what? Dwayne Okoma in Anuye Beatrice in Eku. So in addition to all these dialects we now mention, we now have another group of people who have created their own dialect. They are born in their own village, but they are living with their maternal grandmother who comes from another dialect. So they're combining their village people dialect plus their mother's village people dialect, and the village people will now multiply, and dialect will now become something from the heavens. So why they? All right, Dwayne Okoma sị na ya na ndị Ghana alụọla ọgụ maka ihe gbasara jollof rice. Otu a ka ọ dị ọtụtụ ebe ọ bụrụ na Igbo onye na-eme njem, mgbe ọbụla onye Ghana nọ, onye Nigeria nọ, jollof rice adọrọ n'etiti ha, ọ ga-adaala. Ha anaghị alụchi alụcha. Is a general thing. So there's this continuous contention over the dialect of the Igbo. Cheesy. So the dialect of Igbo, whereby and to be fair, I heard this recently, and where it is said that people that come from Imo tend to believe that they own the Igbo language, while people that come from Imo and generally amongst Igbo people tend to believe that Anambra people think that their dialect is superior. These two situations could be true at the same time. And I want to explain it this way. Nkembo, there's no dialect that is superior to the other. Enweghị olu ndị ka ibe ya. Olu ndị niile nọ n'Igbo bụ otu ihe ahụ. Coco Chic, Kedo, how are you? Whatever you speak as your dialect, by virtue of your creation and incarnation, that's where God placed you, is your dialect. That dialect of Igbo is yours. But because of the history of the Izugbe, the standard version of Igbo language, if you read up to 10 research works, like I have read out to you about 2 or 3, go back. I'm giving you homework you will submit next week. Go and read about the history of the dialects of Igbo and their makeup. You are going to find in most of them, if not all of them, where that a few dialects of Igbo were pointed out as those that contributed most to the Izugbe. And this is not in any way because of the work of one person. It is something that came from scholars. And I'm going to explain this. Mgbe ndị ọcha nọ n'obodo a, mgbe ha wabatara n'ike chee na ha bata ha kugbuo mmadụ niile zọkasị ebe niile wee were mmanụ anyị gbalaga mana ọ dịrị ha mfe o wee ha iri afọ atọ na otu ma ọ bụ ụma tupu ha abata merie na anyị n'agha ọkwa ya ndewo peace Ogbenna mgbe ha mechara were ebe niile na-achịsị dizie ka na ụkwa ha adaala ụkwa ha agbaala ha nwa were ihe niile na-edegharịzi ihe dịka m kọwara anyị n'izu ole gara aga na-achọ ka edegharịa asụsụ anyị mana dịka nke a na-aga n'ihu ụmụafọ Igbo jikọtara onwe ha ọnụ wee hibe otu ndị na-arụ ọrụ ịhụ na asụsụ Igbo bụ nke achịkọtara ọnụ ya nwa bụ ebe izugbe si pụta. When Europeans came, conquered, possessed, and started ruling over us, they wanted to rewrite our language. They made several efforts. We can never forget the efforts of CMS, which is the Anglican Church that, was introduced to us from Britain, from England. Our people were converted to be Christians, baptized in Christianity, and they joined CMS. The same that was happening with the Church Catholic. The Catholic was first to emerge. The Church Catholic was first to emerge into our communities. But research has it that Catholics did not pay adequate attention to trying to use the language of the people to teach them the gospel, quote and unquote. I personally think that films like the original Living in Bondage, put the Anambra dialect forward for years. Then others like Nkolenwa Nsukka and we're also coming to that, Chizzy. I think that's the history I'm bringing up. Then I will get to where you are now. I think one thing between me and you is that it looks like you are running faster than me, Chizzy. Don't become like Nigerian car that facing this way. Chizzy, but I'll go get on the road. All right. Lie the lies in there. Oh my God, Chizzy. All right. So, when the Igbo people themselves, sorry, I was not talking about, because I'm repeating what I said in Igbo now in English. So the Catholic came first, but the Catholic never paid a huge attention to the language of the people. But when the CMS called Protestants came in, their own strategy, led them to paying attention to the language of the people, to want to teach the people in their own dialect. She's in our speed. In their own language. So they had researchers who went in to want to understand how the people spoke, to see how they can make what they can make out of the writing, so that they can use that to teach them. This was not peculiar to Igbo alone. It was happening in all African countries. The CMS, as far as Igbo is concerned, were the ones doing this. So the CMS had to form their own orthography first, which was based on Onitsha Igbo. The CMS headquarters, funnily, was in Onitsha. The Catholic headquarters, funnily, was in Onitsha. Both Bishop Shanahan and Bishop Ajay Crowther, both based in Onitsha. Shanahan being a white man, Ajay Crowther being a Yoruba man, none of which was Igbo, were busy doing the work of reforming the language of the people in terms of writing. This became very, very needful for them, because they needed to unify the people linguistically. As much as unifying Nigeria as a country for maximizing tax collection was so important to the British. Remember, Royal Niger Company. That's how Nigeria was formed. We were nothing but a company. So there was need to ensure that for us to expand rulership and be able to collect tax and do everything in what that these people have to become one, right? They were doing imperial business on Igbo language and culture, pure. And it wasn't just Igbo. They were doing imperialistic business in all African languages. Right. So when the CMS were doing their work, they formed the first CMS orthography writing system based on Onitsha dialect. The Catholic became jealous. Oh, it looks like these people's strategy is working for them. Meanwhile, they are just the newcomers. Nobody will get land. Now we come here first. Now what's happened now? Now we be the landlords. The Catholic, out of jealousy, ran into language and started doing their own. Remember, these people have their resources. Catholic Church should be one of the, if not the richest, organized religious institution in the whole world. And you know where it's coming from, right? And you know how much of our people that are being held hostage by whatever is coming off of Rome as a religious teaching. And we can't run away from it. Sorry if you are a Catholic, I do not preach religion. I talk on it when it has to do with my identity and my language and my culture. I cannot spare religion. I cannot not talk about it. All right. So when the Catholics started their own, they formed their own orthography as well, based on Onitsha dialect, but different from that of the CMS. Now, Catholic, we are the landlords, right? How are not Eba already? They have formed the base. They have formed the population. They have lots of people believing in the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. Our people, our forefathers were converted, to be Catholics. So the Protestants were catching up. But the Protestants have landed now and formed a strategy that make them to stand out. The fewer members that they have, which was also a large population of Igbo people in thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. We are following their teachings and looking at the writing of the Igbo based on the dialect that they created. The colonial time brought Onitsha to the fore. Onitsha, which is a real pronunciation, because of these two religious organizations and some other reasons. You've not even said anything ill of the... Oh, well, I'm just like drawing history. My sister here and my brother, Chizi. Oh my God. All right. So the headquarters of CMS, Onitsha, the headquarters of Catholic, Onitsha, and the institutions that surrounded these two huge religious organizations were being built in Onitsha. Commands were given from Onitsha to all these different Igbo nations. The Catholics started writing their bulletin in Onitsha dialect that they formed. The CMS were writing their hymn because they were better in hymn. In Onitsha dialect, they were translating the English hymn into Igbo language based on Onitsha dialect. Edozie mas na Onitsha. Jesu afụlụ yi n'anya. Ife niile m nwere bụ nke ị ka m bụ, nke ị ka m chọrọ mbụ, became something, a recitation any Igbo person would relate with that is a Catholic. And you can never say it in your own dialect. You have to say it in Jesu afuluminai. Ife niile m nwere bụ nke ị ka m bụ, nke ị ka m chọrọ mbụ. This is an example of how the language became Onisha itself. Chizi is both or either. Beatrice. Okay. Now, Onitsha dialect was popularized, was made popular over and above every other Igbo dialect based on religious sentiments. I don't know when, I don't know if, I'm not a Catholic, I don't know if Catholic has stopped writing their bulletins in the standard, in Onitsha dialects. I can't speak to that. This took years, like years, if not hundreds of years, that led to the Igbo people being concerned that it looks like Igbo language is being hijacked. But the problem they had, the Igbo people, scholars who had this concern, the problem they had was they hardly could speak out because all of them were loyalists of these religious organizations. How would you question the authority of the Catholic Church as a Catholic member? You cannot. Of course, the papacy is infallible and impeccable, believed, assumed. That was what was sold to us. So an average Catholic Igbo who saw that this was going on, who could make a difference, could not make a difference because it had to do with the religious authority. So we had to stay with that. After all, it's still an Igbo dialect. What is wrong in speaking it? And Igbo became Onitsha dialect for a long time. So people could still speak their dialect, but when they went to church, you would be forced to listen and possibly speak or respond in the Onitsha dialect. So when Igbo Izugbe started, several prominent Onitsha people or people who speak or spoke Onitsha dialect, which now extended to what you now call Anambra dialect. It was becoming difficult, increasingly difficult for them to accept Izugbe. Especially when Izugbe is formed, believed to have been formed, having more of other dialects from Imo to form the base or basis. So it's difficult for people who have been used to having their dialects up there and other people learning them to now believe that they should speak or use the standard. Please, if anything I'm saying is out of order, is incorrect, I would like you to point it out, okay? And what we are doing here, this is today's background is purely academic. And in the next class, I believe we're going to go fully into looking at how our dialects are being expressed. And there's no intention of castigating one dialect over the other. No, it's bringing out academic facts. So, and even though what I'm saying, I say it is anecdotal, but it's a factual thing that happened historically over time. So the more the speakers of our Anambra dialect or our Onitsha dialect found it difficult to adapt to the Izugbe because it was not full of what they have been used to speaking. And also because a writing system had been formed from these two religious organizations based on the Onitsha dialect, so they could also see what is being formed. I know I read a little bit of the some of the catechisms and all of that in Onitsha dialects written by the Catholic Church. This happened until some publications like Azundo, started coming, where now you now see Anam Aga Aba, without you seeing something that looks a little bit like Onitsha dialect. So books like that started coming out to fortify the Standard Igbo. Okay. Now, when Igbo Izugbe was formed, and is formed like we read out here, it says a lot of Standard Igbo is formed from the Owerri and Umuahia dialects. And this other one will say here, Central and Southern, Owerri, Umuahia, Ohoho, Mbise, spoken primarily in Imo and Abia State. The Owerri and Umuahia dialect form the structural foundation for Igbo Izugbe. This is what you're going to find in many research works. Now, my question will be for anyone in the class: if the people who speak these other dialects that I mentioned begin to form Ngabase as per saying I don't own Igbo language, sure you go blame them. Oh my God! Remember, Ngabase is already being formed since a few hundred years back by the Catholic and CMS, based on Onitsha dialect, and anybody who spoke Onitsha and Anambra dialect was regarded as the elitistic Igbo. But Izugbe was not being formed based on the works of researchers and scholars, and is believed that much of the dialect formation was done from some other dialects that are not what has been spoken. Remember, Onitsha dialect is also part of what formed the basis of the Igbo Izugbe. The difference here is it is not solely Onitsha. It is a conglomeration of what is coming from other dialects. If people from these other dialects begin to see themselves, after all, that we own Igbo, you go blame them. After all, no be their turn. Emiloko. Oh my God. All right. So finally, we now have Igbo Izugbe. We now have Standard Igbo. And the Standard Igbo is the Igbo expected of all Igbo people to know. Now, I'm going to make this statement. The man Chinua Achebe is popularly regarded, revered, respected amongst Igbo people for his literary and poetic work, scientific work he did throughout his time. Chinua Achebe bụ nwoke Igbo ọtụtụ ndị Igbo hụrụ n'anya, ndị Igbo na-asọpụrụ, ọtụtụ ndị Igbo ji eme ọnụ n'ihi ọrụ ọ rụrụ mgbe ọ dị ndụ, ọrụ ndekọ, nnyocha na nchọcha, ọrụ ndị gbadoro ụkwụ n'akụkọ ala, ọrụ gbadoro ụkwụ na ihe gbasara omenala. Chinua Achebe did a wonderful work. He made Igbo people proud. That is why even in his death, even in his death, Igbo people still respect him. But Chinua Achebe now made efforts for a long period of time in his adulthood to project and propagate the adoption of dialects over standard. Listen to me. I will not be surprised if Chinua Achebe's position before he died was because he came from Anambra, and maybe he was very much alive and active during the colonial time. and he may have been born when Onitsha dialect was raised above every other dialect. I will not be surprised if Chinua Achebe's position was formed because of this, issue, because of this development. Because, of course, Chinua Achebe was born before Nigeria gained independence. He saw much of some of the colonial era, okay? And then he saw the Nigerian Civil War, which came after 1960. I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of those that were not happy that Izugbe is being projected as a standard Igbo, not Onitsha dialect. So because of his position, Chinua Achebe understood his position as an Igbo scholar, very respected Igbo scholar, but he chose to use it to propagate the dialect of Igbo people over and above the standard. And this brought heavy criticism amongst Igbo scholars. Ndewo kachijo dalu o. Several Igbo scholars have criticized openly this position of his. I know some people side it. I know some people secretly also do, even though they cannot openly say that. So Chinua Achebe's position, scholars believe, contributed to modern day effort towards setting Igbo back from that effort of unification through the standard. Now, several scholars that may have criticized Chinua Achebe are, in my opinion, standing more firmly from scientific point of view than Chinua Achebe's position. The scientific point of view has to do with the fact that ọbụ na amụọ nwa, nwatakịrị na-amụ olu ndị ya. Asụsụ nwatakịrị ji aṅụ mmiri, asụsụ ọ ga-eji ama ihe ụwa kwuru. The language by which a child forms their worldview is a language called the language of immediate environment. Is a language called the language of that child's cultural identity, especially if two or one of the parents, especially the father, with regard to Igbo, is a native of that language. They say it is called L1. The language of immediate environment. And that language has a dialect. So that child will be learning that particular dialect of that language. But science has it that the child's brain is open to learning any other variation of that language, to the point of learning another language even at the same time, all join. Science also has it that communication becomes effective when I, the speaker, am using a medium, a set of codes that you, the listener, would assimilate, comprehend, and process well. If I'm using a set of codes, if I'm using a medium that you cannot easily, finely process, assimilate, and understand, I am miscommunicating. Namisiana de yan. Na me, I dey talk to myself. Odozi akoza alonde o ya dekwara gị na mma. Okay? Ana m asụrụ onwe m n'ire because I can't communicate with you. So science has it that the language slate of the child in the brain can accept multiple dialects as well as different languages as the child is growing. Now, the question scientifically will be, why limit the child? Why would you limit the child to just the dialect? When the child has bountiful opportunities out there to communicate with people who are coming from different dialectal backgrounds and be able to make a maximum communication, maximum expression. Humble, fabulous. Ndewo, oh, dalo. This is your first time. Aina nabatage. Okay? So scholars will say, why would Chinua Achebe take the position of saying, let us speak our dialect, project our dialect, and our dialect only? The other problem with Chinua Achebe's position became this language has taken this stressful historical, developmental, and growth process. Asụsụ abụla nke nwerela ihe nramahụ, ihe isi ike na mgbalị ya niile wee pụta topụta ruo na a na-ede ya ede. From the insipid time when writing was not very popular to the time the Europeans came and brought their own anglicized formation of letters and sounds, to the time it succeeded that and now came to the point we can have an orthography that relates to all Igbo, and then we can write in that form and everything. Why do we go back? Why should we? Cheta na m kwuru na ọtụtụ ihe anyị na-asụ n'olu ndị anyị abụghị ihe anyị maka esi ede. Let me give you an example. Enwere okwu a na-ekwu n'Owerri, ba ama ụyọ ma gị. O nwere okwu ọzọ a na-ekwu na Mbaise, ahụegla ftawa. If you come from any of these dialects, can you write these two for me? If you come from any of these two dialects and you can write these two for me, I will raise a hand and clap for you. You may try to write it if you have an advanced knowledge of language and linguistics, or maybe phonetics, phonology. In nwere ike ịgbalị ka ide some of what I said in Owerri dialect and in Mbaise dialect. In Owerri dialect, ụyọ ma gị ba ama ụyọ ma gị. In Mbaise dialect, ọdịble hụegla hụ ga na-akpọ keshi. If you were to write it the way I said it. Well, Beatrice say, Oyo bo, Oyo mi na ge. That is 0/100. Him soro Oyo ma ge. Even if you say Oyo wo, Oyo mi na ge. Okay, right. This is how it is in all our languages, dialects. Now, the question for Chinua Achebe's position, Kachijo say, Uyo, mae, nsogbu dịkwa. Unu ahụla na ebuterela m onwe m nsogbu. Ụzọalọ say, Bahama, nsogbu. Bahama nọkwa na America, Odoziakụ Rose. Bahama, Oyo bo, Oyo ma gị. Okay. I got initiator. Which kind of average lives when a kora fanala? Jesus say, Oyo ma age. Oyo ma age. Cheese balitro. Mano dete chabe ya. So cheese can we Kenya average. Beatrice. Oyo ma age. All right. So I commend this one, right? unu dechakwa Chizi decha ya gị dezie nke Mbaise ọ dịbla ihe gla hụrụ ga na-akpọ kishi Oge Okoye ndewo daalụ ndewo alright now ọ bụrụ na asụsụ anyị na-asụ bụ nke rugoro na enwere ka esi ede ya onye ọbụla bụ nwa afọ Igbo na-agụta nwa Igbo ga-agụ ya ghọta ya kedu ihe mere anyị ga-eji laghachizi azụ ịchọ ụzọ a ga-eji edenwu Peace Ogbenna sị gịnị Bama ụyọ ma gị Peace Ogbenna Bama ụyọ ma gị Chizedaria ụyọ mụọ agị unu na-agbalị mana mgbe unu detere ya ka m ga-ama ihe m ga-agwa unu all right now you see how we are having an issue trying to write a singular dialect, right? An expression in a dialect. The question ajụjụ ụmụafọ Igbo na-ajụ the position of Chinua Achebe wee bụrụ why go back? Kedu ihe anyị ga-eji alaghachi azụ ka anyị gaghachi chọọ ka anyị mụọ ka esi ede ihe anyị olu ndị anyị ebe e nwere ka esi ede Igbo ebe e nwere ka esi atụgharị okwu ndị ọzọ n'Igbo ebe e nwego ka esi ede Igbo mmadụ niile bụ nwa afọ Igbo aghọta ihe edere why go back? So scholars believed that Chinua Achebe's position was a setback to the development and unification of Igbo language. Now, like I was also saying the scientific part of it, ama oyo ma age. Chizi, that's a much better one. Ama oyo ma age. I think it sounds very closely to what can be written as Igbo. As that Igbo were. Korono Chizi aka. Ndewono. Right. Okay. Chizi. Dezie ọdịbla enwe gla hụrụ ga na-akpọ kishi. Ngwade nke ahụ. Idetezie ya ga-ebịa ka m nye gị aga m enye gị depends on ebe ị nọ 20 pounds, $20, 20 rand or 20 naira. Depends on wherever you are. Okay, Chizi. All right. Chizi, ideteghala ya ebe ọbụla ị nọ ego ahụ ka m ga-enye gị 20 kwaza or 20 rand, 20 yen, 20 pounds or $20. Adịkwa ka na Nigeria so gị mara gwa ha fa. Oh my God. Kachi Joe said this one go talk cut tongue. Why you go talk cut tongue? Unless you don't know how to speak in tongues. If you know how to speak in tongues, you have to navigate. Jeez, we got wickedness with that one, Kwana. We are saying the same thing. I got me, you know, get being annoyed. Say, oh, no, in Nigeria, oh, 20 naira cost. You guys are granite, you know, Gary. Jesus, is not worth the stress. You see why? We don't want to believe in our Niger. Oh my God. All right. So, the position, scholars believe that will take us back. But the problem is, so many people who believe in Chinua Achebe started thinking in this ideology. Ọtụtụ ndị mmadụ wee na-ahụzi ya sị ihe nwoke a na-ekwu bụkwa eziokwu na ọ ka mma ka anyị na-asụ na-ede olu ndị anyị. But the science of language says no to this. Chizi kachijos na ị nwere ike ijikwa ego ahụ egode kulikuli ọkwa na-eme anyị. So ị nwere ike ịgba mbọ gbalịa. All right. So ụfọdụ ndị wee na-esoro ụdị nkụzi a ọ dịbele ihe ị gara hụrụ gị laa kpọkeshi well chizi ịgbala mbọ mana enweta ya aga m enye gị 1/100 n'ihi itinyere ihe ebe ahụ ihe bụ standard okay na-agba mbọ right so the question now we are asking ourselves is after all these years, why would we go back to limiting ourselves to dialect only? When a child can learn the dialect, a child can acquire the dialect, even acquire the language, the general or standard Igbo, and learn other languages while they are growing up. Why limit ourselves? That's the question. But because Achebe was a very famous figure in literature, in science, in learning, and amongst Igbo people. So kwili so na the move. The business I saw I thought it was only akara. Mo myself na chi give me akara station nkem. Maybe we can start frying pan. No, and it's going frying pan. We're video go to first. Maybe apply for grant from the wife of the president or charam grant and just as a frying pan. So as a and all of that. And agbado, good. Okay. That was a very very, very unique, funny way of addressing your people. All right. So now, but the Chinua Achebe's position rested in the minds of people that began to look at, okay, if this man is projecting dialect, after all, the dialect we knew that used to be the popular dialect was Onitsha dialect, right? Maybe invariably it's projecting Onitsha dialect. I relate to this so much because I was present in 1991, no, in 2000 and what? No, it should be either 1999, I believe, yes, when Chinua Achebe delivered the Ahajoko lecture in Owerri. And that was what his lecture was about. I was in that lecture. I think it was Ahajoko. Yeah, it was Ahajoko. He came in wheelchair. That was his last Ahajoko lecture before he passed. 1999. I was a student in Imo State University. Adible he egala horo gela bokishi. Peace. Agamenyege 5/100. There were peace. Ihe ka fọrọ n'ime. And until you date that aspect of that dialect, 5/100 peace. All right. This became something, even till today, some people believe is a setback in Igbo language. Now, Chizi mentioned, Chizi Rutarayaka, ihe gbasara Nollywood. It happened that in the 21st century, I think late 80s and 90s coming up, the Nollywood industry started something revolutionary with living in bondage. She didn't get it, Chizi. She did not get it. There's a few words there that if you cannot write, and that is what I'm looking for. Before I look at whether I'm one more day, I may not judge you with that, but there's a few words there, so I still give you 5. I'm very economical with my mark. I don't give mark anyhow. All right. So the 80s and 90s, after the soap opera, checkmates, and all of them, took the day in the late 80s, I believe, 90s. The Nollywood industry came up with the revolutionary living in bondage that was cast in Igbo and mainly on a dialect, where people like Kanayo O Kanayo, who is an Mbise born, chose to speak on a dialect throughout in that movie and continues to use that dialect in most of his movies. And many other people who are from other dialects chose to stay with Onitsha dialect. The Nollywood industry, which everybody now becomes a fan of, became a standard, a measuring standard for what dialect you spoke or you will speak or you speak till today. Two things: the religious organization instituted by the European colonialists. Second, the entertainment industry, which everybody is attracted to, both of which projected the Onitsha dialect, became an issue. So, I do not see why I should be surprised when a person will come to my class and ask me, which Igbo are you teaching? After the Nollywood industry, in the late 90s, in the 2000s, the entertainment industry revolution expanded to the music industry, and Igbo singers and artists coming from every part of Igbo chose Onitsha dialects to speak, to use, to rap in their music and everything. So an average Igbo music you listen to today would have an ample, a good chunk of Onitsha dialect in it, or Anambra dialect, as opposed to the music that you would have heard in the 70s and 80s by different people who spoke and sang in their dialects. The likes of Mike Ejaga speaking in his dialect, singing in his dialect. The likes of Celestin Uku singing in his dialect, without minding whether it sounded Onitsha or not. Chizzy said, "Oh, ihe ọbụla kwụtara ụgwọ bụ ọrụ." Who pays the piper dictates the tune. The directors and financiers of That Living in Bondage mandated all the actors to speak that Igbo dialect. I did not know that, and thank you, Chizzy, for pointing that out. And this is talking very much about the politics of language. There is a huge political activity going on in determining which language you speak, which dialects you speak. Even if it's English, you and I are mandated to write in Queen's English, if at all we know what that means. Do we even know? Then some of us who now are inclined to go to America will now be saying, wanting to use I wanna gonna. Right. So till today, America and Britain fight over your tongue and my tongue to detect which variation of English that you will speak. And Americans will say, well, we speak Americans. Because Americans do not understand British accent and British dialect of English. Americans say, okay, we speak American, Oh my God. Where two elephants fight. So you and I are the ones, they are playing chess over our tongue. And because of whichever position you take, how you get inclined, it it will inform what you speak and how you speak. While I didn't know be small, my brother catch you. So, on a more serious note, that is what has been happening in Igbo language. Now, while the Anambra or Onitsha people are getting mad, why would the Standard Igbo be formed based on in dialects of Imo State and all of that, or people from Imo? How we learning? Thank you, Cross, my brother. Thanks for the heart. So why they are getting Yoketi, I didn't really get what you tried to write. How we learning Igbo today? Yoketi, maybe you can rephrase. So why those from? Okay, how are we learning Igbo today? I still don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand Yoketi. So why they are getting mad? Why is it that you are going to form Standard Igbo without forming it based on Onitsha dialect? After all, that we start this thing, now we day here. the people from around Imo, whose dialect form the basic foundation of the standard, are getting mad at these guys. Why don't you even adapt? Use the standard. And as I begin to conclude, I will say this. Today, while many scholars, Igbo scholars, no, Yoketia, today is about the history of the dialects of Igbo. That's why you home so beke nilam na abo ka onye obula weki ghọta. Today I'm sharing the history of the dialects of the Igbo. Okay, in the next class we are going to look at the different dialects. Onye obula ga-asụ nke ya, de nke ya, I wee hụ ya, I wee kọwaa ya, wee hụ ka o si dere. So, why this is going on till today, Igbo scholars are looking at this as an unnecessary contention. Reason being that the Igbo Izugbe, which has come to stay as a more formal writing of the Igbo, is what an average Igbo person should know how to use. I will not, I know you will not be surprised to know that there are teachers in Igbo who teach their students in Onitsha dialect, or what you might call today. You know, Onitsha dialect expanded to become Anambra dialect. I know you will not be surprised to hear that teachers from primary to secondary, even university, there are several hundreds of them who teach in their dialect. But what I am yet to understand is how they write this dialect comfortably to this case, who are going to face WAEC, SSCE, NECO, being questioned in the Standard Igbo. So that's what I have not understood. Aghọtabeghị ka ha si nwee ikikere ịkụziri ụmụ ha olu ndị Onitsha maọbụ nke Anambra, rukwe na ha nwere ike ide ya ede, ma ha mara na ụmụazị ndị a gaji ile ule WAEC maọbụ SSCE ebe a ga-ajụ ha ajụjụ na Igbo Izugbe. Ị bụrụ onye nkụzi na ebe a, ị na-iji olu Onitsha akụziri ụmụ gị akwụkwọ, iji olu Anambra akụziri ụmụ gị akwụkwọ, chetakwa na ụmụ gị ahụ ga-aje ịza ajụjụ n'olu ndị Igbo, n'olu Izugbe Igbo. Agaghị edere ha WAEC. Unu marakwa na anyị na ndị WAEC ka na-ese okwu. Agaghị eji olu Onitsha edere ha WAEC maọbụ ajụ ha ajụjụ. A ga-eji olu Izugbe. Having listened to this class, I want you to give me your position. Do you think that the projecting the dialect over Izugbe is a better position for the Igbo language? And I want your answer on this screen right away. If yes, why? One answer. Yes, this is my why. Do you think that projecting the Igbo dialect is better than projecting the Izugbe, the standard? Or you think that Igbo is better off with the standard being a formal way of writing over and above the dialect? Remember, we at Omenka app, our policy is speak your dialect, especially when you are speaking to or communicating with people from your community, your family, your dialect area, your dialect cluster. But learn the standard Igbo. That's our position, just so you know. Right, ngwa, onye ọbụla zaa ajụjụ m, obidogo. I chere na ọ ka mma ịsụ na ide na ịkụziri ụmụazị ihe na olundi? I chere na ọ ka mma ịkwalite olundi karịa Izugbe? Ka i chere na ọ ka mma ịkwalite Izugbe karịa olundi? Steffi, ndewo. No, better to have a standard for academics and include dialect for enrichment. Ndewo. I love the word enrichment, Steffi. I love the word enrichment. And the reason I believe you use that word is because Igbo words that flow from dialects are supposed to be looked into and see how they would form part of the standard and helping the language develop. Enrichment. Ya, ana m achọ ka onye ọbụla zaa ajụjụ a nke ọma. There are several Igbo words in the dialects that have not found themselves in the standard. Yes, dialects help for enrichment. Kedu ndị bịara akwụkwọ taa? I chere na ọ ka mma na anyị na-akwalite olu ndị anyị niile dị iche iche, ma ọ bụ otu olu ndị dịka Onitsha ma ọ bụ Anambra karịa ịkwalite Izugbe? Ka i chere na ọ ka mma ịkwalite Izugbe? Kedu ihe bụ ihe mere iji chee na ọ bụ nke a ma ọ bụ nke ọzọ? Speak your dialect. Write what I can understand. Dialect is beautiful, but for communication, the standards should be upheld. I think, Beatrice, what you should say is for wider communication. Wider communication. Thank you, Beatrice. Right. And what onye ọzọ dịka anyị na-abịa Chizi wee sị mba ọ kaghị mma ịkụziri ha n'olu ndị. Chizi, ị na-eme ka nye gị asambodo maka ịbụ ezigbo nwa afọ nwa akwụkwọ na-edete Igbo otu m si otu esi akpa m obiọma. Ndewo o Chizi, ndewo. Mba ọ kaghị mma ịkụziri ha n'olu ndị, because without standardization there's bound to be anarchy and injustice. Yes, I agree with you. The issue, I think, Chizi, one word that should be there is even chaos. Not even confusion, chaos. Because there's going to be a very serious level of fighting over which dialect is superior. And anyị na-eme ya na bekee. Anyị na-eme ya na bekee, Steffi. Steffi, gịnị bụ aha Igbo gị? I'm not sure I should be calling you in English. Aha ndị ọcha. Gịnị bụ aha Igbo gị, Steffi? Anyị na-eme ya na bekee. Dịka ị gaghị aga idegara nwa Eliza nọ na England akwụkwọ, idewe ya na Nigerian English. Ọjọọ gị Chinonso nne m nke ndewo. Ọjọọ gị nọ nke ị mụtara. Ọ ga-agụda akwụkwọ gị. Kedu onye na-achịde ndị obodo ahụ bụ asị na ọ wụ eze ka ọ eze nwanyị? Ụnụ m eze nwanyị ka ha nwere ọtụtụ oge, nke nwụrụ oge gara aga. Nwa ya nwoke nọzi ebe ahụ ugbu a wụzie onye na-achị ha. Ichi degara nke nwoke ahụ akwụkwọ gị sị ya na gị jide ya na sị na ha na yes, she's confusion and a feeling of fairness. Ichi degara king ha akwụkwọ isi ya na ha na and that's the way you have the right to start the English. I'm here in Niger messaging you. You know, I'm writing this letter today because I wanted to tell you that the level of insecurity in this country is something. In fact, I don't even know how to say it. let's say that, you know, your country comes here and help us out and remove this man. Makwano ị na-edere akwa nwa Eliza. Oh my God. If not get money, I say ọha akwụkwọ ga edere eji nwayọ tinye na latrine. Oh, all right. So, n'izu na-abịa abịa anyị ga-eleba anya na mkpụrụ okwu na ka esi ede. These are two major aspects of the language that would help us understand the differentiations in the dialects and the standard. Vocabulary versus the writing structure. I mentioned it. For those that are joining us for the first time in this class, if you are in need of learning Igbo, if you are an Igbo born, but you are deficient in Igbo language, you have a need. Ihe koroge, achọghị m ka oru na the level akwụkwọ nsọ gasị na enyola ayọla gị ayọchago gị ka akwa na ihe pụrụ n'ime gị. Ịmara onye ayọchara yọcha ya enwe ihe fọrọ n'ime ya ederi emene etekelofas. You don't want it to get to that point. You just have to help yourself by starting a journey towards reinculturation, learning Igbo. You can't inculturate without the language. Wherever you are growing up from, or na Parakoto, ka ọ bụ na Lagos, ka ọ n'ugwu, ka ọ bụzi ndị gara ofesi, ebe ọbụla ị nọ, inweghị ngọpụ. This is a class for you. This is a place you can learn. This is a community for you. We meet here every Monday. My next week class is going to start 1 hour earlier. 1 hour earlier. So wherever you are, you know the time I start. 6 p.m. Nigerian time. 1 p.m. Eastern time. Know that I'm going to start an hour earlier. And it might be like that for the rest of the season. So my time has changed. So I'm going to be starting 5 p.m. Nigerian time, 12 noon Eastern time. That will be from next week. So join the class if you have a need. Join our Telegram group. The link is on the TikTok bio. Cheesy, I've not seen you in that Telegram group. You can find us, Omenka Igbo Action Group. That is the name, Omenka Igbo Action Group. If you have additional need for yourself and your family, your children, if you are a parent, download Omenka app. We are restructuring, rebuilding Omenka app in a very much more fanciful, more productive and enriched way. That's the work we've been doing. When you see the new face of Omenka, you are going to love it so much. If you have other resources that you know that are reliable, use them. Get yourself enculturated, Nwafi Igbo, Muta Igbo, wherever you are. This is a clarion call. If you do not do this, you have yourself to blame because your ancestors are going to ask you questions, and your children, posterity, will also ask you questions. eche ma isi na anyị ga-eleba anya n'ụdị olu ndị dị iche iche n'izu ụka ọzọ. Yes, peace, anyị ga-eleba anya n'ụdị olu ndị dị iche iche. Anyị ga-elebakwa anya na ihe ga-eme anyị ga-eji eleba nwa anya n'olu ndị dị iche iche bụ ihe abụọ ndị a mkpọpụtara: mkpụrụ okwu na ka esi ede, vocabulary and the writing structure. Chinedu, yeah, Telegram app in bio. It is in our Omenka bio, the link. If you go to our link on this TikTok, you will see, instead of our website, you will see the Telegram link, Omenka Igbo Action Group. Join. We are still forming. We are still asking people to please join. We have not had major conversations there, but I have written out the tenets why we formed this group. Nkembobo, inyero nwaanyị aka ịmụtakwa Igbo. Beyond this class, this was our agreement. Daalụ Chinedu. Nke abụọ bụ, we are going towards forming policy documents or helping to see what change we can create in Igbo, on the things that are going wrong in Igbo language. So you're going to be informed for you to participate, or take role or take part in this kind of action. You are going to be informed. So please, muta Igbo, nwafu Igbo, learn Igbo. Okay? All right. I will see you next week, 5 p.m. Nigerian time, and it's going to be 12 noon Eastern time. Until then, stay alive. Keep being alive, okay? And healthy.